Sarah Martinez stepped out of her older brother's pickup truck and immediately felt every eye on the school parking lot turn toward her. The crisp October morning air carried the sound of whispers and barely contained laughter as students noticed her outfit. She wore perfectly pressed Army combat uniform pants, polished black boots, and a tan t-shirt that met military standards. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, not a single strand out of place. "Look at Martinez playing dress-up," called out Jessica Chun from across the parking lot. "Did you get lost on your way to paintball, Sarah?" The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Sarah kept her chin up and walked toward the school entrance, her boots clicking against the asphalt with military precision. She had expected this reaction, but it still stung. What none of her classmates knew was that Sarah had earned the right to wear that uniform through 2 years of intense training, sacrifice, and dedication that would have broken most of them. Inside Riverside High School, the teasing continued. During first period English, Brad Williams leaned over and whispered loud enough for others to hear, "Hey Martinez, you planning to invade the cafeteria at lunch?" The classroom erupted in snickers, and even Mrs. Peterson struggled to hide her smile behind her lesson plan. Sarah focused on her notebook, writing down every word of the lesson about character development in literature. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were studying protagonists who faced adversity and emerged stronger. She wondered what her classmates would think if they knew about her own character development over the past 2 years. At lunch, Sarah sat alone at her usual table near the windows. The cafeteria buzzed with the typical Friday energy, but she felt isolated in her uniform. Groups of students kept glancing her way, pointing and whispering. Some took pictures with their phones, probably planning to post them on social media with mocking captions. "So what's with the costume, Martinez?" asked Tyler Brooks as he approached her table with his usual group of followers. Tyler was the kind of student who peaked in high school, captain of the football team, dating the head cheerleader, and convinced the world revolved around him. "You joining the Army or something? They even take girls now." Sarah looked up calmly. "Yes, they do. And yes, I am." Tyler laughed. You? In the Army? What are you going to do? Organize their paperwork." His friends joined in the laughter. "I bet you've never even seen a real gun, let alone fired one." Sarah returned to her sandwich without responding. She had learned discipline meant knowing when not to engage. But inside, she was thinking about the countless hours she had spent at the shooting range, the obstacle courses she had conquered, and the leadership challenges she had overcome. Tyler had no idea what real strength looked like. The afternoon brought more of the same. In chemistry class, her lab partner Mark Stevens asked, "So are you like in ROTC or something?" "I didn't know we had that here." When Sarah explained she was in the National Guard, Mark looked confused. "Isn't that just like weekend camping?" "My dad says it's where people go when they're not tough enough for the real military." Sarah mixed the chemicals for their experiment with steady hands. "It's a little more complicated than that," she said quietly. She thought about the summer training she had completed, the physical and mental challenges that had pushed her to her absolute limits. The long marches carrying full packs, the sleep deprivation exercises, the leadership scenarios where failure meant letting down your entire unit. After school, Sarah had planned to drive straight home, but she noticed a crowd gathering around the football field. Homecoming festivities were starting early, with various clubs setting up booths and the marching band practicing. She almost kept walking, but something made her turn toward the field. "Hey, Army girl," called out Michelle Foster, the student body president. "You here to provide security for homecoming?" More laughter followed. Michelle was popular, smart, and destined for an Ivy League college. She represented everything that came easy in high school, success without real struggle. Sarah walked closer to the field, where she could see the homecoming court practicing their entrance routine. The football players were running drills, their movements sloppy compared to the precision Sarah had grown accustomed to in her military training. Coach Williams barked orders that would have been considered gentle suggestions in basic training. "Martinez," called out Coach Williams. "You planning to join the team? We could use someone who shows up in uniform." The entire team turned to look, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was used to being noticed for her achievements, not for being a spectacle. As Sarah stood at the edge of the field, she pulled out her phone and checked the time. It was 4:30 p.m. She had been enduring mockery all day, but she knew something her classmates didn't. This wasn't just any Friday afternoon. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, and finally it was almost time. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. All day, students had treated her uniform like a costume, a joke, something to mock. They saw a teenage girl playing dress-up, not understanding that she had earned every thread of that uniform through dedication and sacrifice. They made jokes about weekend camping, not knowing she had completed the same basic training as active-duty soldiers. Sarah thought about her journey to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been just another high school sophomore, unremarkable and unsure of her future. Her family struggled financially, and college seemed like an impossible dream. Her father worked 2 jobs just to keep up with basic expenses, and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Sarah's older brother had dropped out of school to work full-time, and she feared she might follow the same path. That's when she first heard about the National Guard college benefit programs. A recruiter had visited their school, talking about opportunities for education, training, and service. Most students had ignored the presentation, more interested in their phones than their futures. But Sarah had listened carefully, asking questions that impressed the recruiter. The path hadn't been easy. She spent her junior year preparing physically and mentally for the commitment. While her classmates worried about prom themes and graduation parties, Sarah was doing push-ups and studying military history. She woke up at 5 a.m. to run 3 miles before school, then stayed up late completing her regular homework after guard training sessions. Basic training had been the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. For 10 weeks, she lived in a world where weakness wasn't tolerated and mediocrity was failure. She learned to push beyond what she thought were her limits, to lead when leadership was needed, and to follow orders without question when that's what the mission required. The physical challenges had been intense. Long marches with heavy packs, obstacle courses that seemed impossible, and fitness standards that many recruits couldn't meet. But the mental challenges had been even harder. Learning to think strategically under pressure, to make decisions that affected her entire unit, to maintain composure when everything around her was chaos. Sarah had excelled in ways that surprised even her instructors. She discovered natural talent for tactical planning and an ability to motivate others during difficult challenges. Her drill sergeants had noted her potential for leadership, and she had graduated in the top 10% of her class. Now, standing at the edge of her high school football field in the uniform she had earned, Sarah felt the weight of that journey. Every snicker, every joke, every mocking comment from her classmates felt small compared to what she had already overcome. They saw a teenage girl in camouflage. She knew she was a soldier. The football team finished their drill and started walking toward the locker room. Some players nodded at Sarah as they passed, a few still smirking at her outfit. The homecoming court continued practicing their wave and smile routine, preparing for tomorrow night's big game and dance. Sarah checked her phone again. 4:45 p.m. She felt a familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with pride. Soon, very soon, her classmates would understand that her uniform wasn't a costume or a joke. They would see what real service looked like, what commitment and sacrifice actually meant. She thought about her guard unit, the men and women she had trained with and served alongside. They came from all walks of life: college students, working parents, retirees, and teenagers like herself who had chosen to serve their country while pursuing their education. They were teachers and mechanics, nurses and farmers, people who balanced civilian careers with military service. What united them wasn't their day jobs or their backgrounds, but their willingness to answer the call when needed. They trained together 1 weekend each month and 2 weeks each summer, staying ready for whatever mission might come their way. Disaster relief, homeland security, overseas deployments, they prepared for all of it. Sarah had been part of flood relief efforts the previous spring, helping evacuate families and distribute supplies when the river overflowed its banks. She had seen real fear in people's eyes and felt the responsibility of being someone others could count on in their worst moments. She had carried elderly residents to safety, organized supply distribution, and worked 18-hour days without complaint. Her classmates knew nothing about that side of her life. They saw her in school every day, quiet and focused on her studies, not knowing she spent her weekends learning skills that could save lives. They didn't know about the leadership courses she had completed, the emergency medical training she had received, or the tactical exercises that had taught her to think clearly under extreme pressure. The crowd around the football field was growing as more students arrived for homecoming activities. The marching band was setting up for practice, their instruments gleaming in the afternoon sun. Cheerleaders stretched on the track, preparing for their routine. Parents began arriving with cameras, ready to capture memories of their children's high school experience. Sarah watched it all with new perspective. 6 months ago, she would have felt left out, wishing she could be part of the easy social world that seemed so important to everyone else. Now she understood that there were bigger things in life than homecoming courts and football games. Not that those things were wrong or unimportant. They were just different from the path she had chosen. The mockery continued around her. Students walking past made comments about her costume and wondered aloud if she was planning to play soldier all weekend. Some took selfies with her in the background, probably planning to post them with humorous captions. Sarah remained calm and composed, her military training helping her maintain dignity despite the juvenile behavior surrounding her. A group of senior girls approached, led by Amanda Price, who was known for her sharp tongue and cruel sense of humor. "Oh my God, Sarah, what does this look supposed to be?" Amanda asked with exaggerated concern. "Are you having some kind of identity crisis? Because there are people who can help with that." Her friends giggled, phones already out to record whatever happened next. Sarah recognized the setup. Amanda was performing for her audience, using Sarah as entertainment. It was the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers specialized in, attacking anyone who dared to be different. "It's my guard uniform," Sarah said simply. "You're what now?" Amanda asked, genuinely confused. "Like security guard? Do you work at the mall?" "National Guard," Sarah clarified, her voice steady and patient. Amanda laughed. "Oh, honey, that's not real military. That's like diet military. Military light. It's what people do when they want to feel tough, but can't handle the real thing." Sarah felt her jaw clench slightly, but she maintained her composure. Amanda had no idea what she was talking about, but ignorance had never stopped her from having opinions before. Sarah thought about her drill sergeants, who had been active duty Army with multiple combat deployments. They definitely hadn't treated guard training as diet military. "I mean, seriously," Amanda continued, encouraged by her friend's laughter and the growing audience. "What are you going to do with that? Spend weekends pretending to be a soldier? It's like adult playing dress up." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down and felt her heart rate increase. It was from her unit commander. "Inbound your location. 5 minutes. Stay in position." Sarah looked up at Amanda and her crowd of followers, then at the growing gathering of students and parents around the football field. She checked the sky, noting the clear conditions and light wind. Perfect flying weather. "You know what your problem is, Sarah?" Amanda was still talking, building to what she probably thought would be a devastating conclusion. "You're trying so hard to be special, to be different, but you're really just ordinary. We all see through this little act of yours." Sarah smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she'd worn all day. "You might want to cover your ears in about 3 minutes," she said quietly. Amanda looked confused. "What's that supposed to mean? Are you threatening me?" Sarah shook her head. "No threat, just friendly advice." The sound started as a distant rumble, barely noticeable over the noise of the crowd. Sarah heard it first because she had been trained to recognize aircraft by their audio signatures. The rhythmic thumping of rotor blades, growing steadily louder, approaching from the northeast. Students began looking around, trying to identify the source of the increasing noise. Parents stopped their conversations and scanned the sky. The marching band faltered in their practice, distracted by the growing mechanical thunder that seemed to be coming directly toward them. Sarah stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the horizon where she knew the aircraft would appear. Her heart was pounding, but her expression remained calm and professional. 2 years of training had taught her to control her emotions, to project confidence even when she felt excitement or anxiety. The sound grew louder, more distinct. Now everyone could hear it clearly, the unmistakable sound of a military helicopter approaching at speed. Students pointed and shouted, trying to spot the aircraft. Some pulled out phones to record whatever was about to happen. Amanda's confident smirk faded as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. "What did you do?" she asked Sarah, her voice no longer mocking, but uncertain. Sarah didn't respond. She was watching the sky, waiting for the moment her classmates would finally understand what her uniform really meant. The moment they would realize that some things in life were bigger than high school social hierarchies and weekend parties. The helicopter was close now, its approach creating a wind that bent the grass on the football field and sent loose papers flying. Students backed away from the open area, suddenly, nervous about what was happening in their safe, predictable world. Sarah remained in position, her uniform crisp and her posture perfect. She was ready for what came next, ready to show her school what real service looked like. The jokes and mockery of the past day were about to be forgotten, replaced by something none of them would ever forget. The sound of the rotors was deafening now, and everyone on the field could see the dark shape of the aircraft approaching fast and low. Sarah checked her watch one more time and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Right on schedule. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would change how everyone saw her forever. But more importantly, it was a moment that would show them what dedication, service, and real commitment actually looked like. Her uniform wasn't a costume. It was a symbol of something most of them had never experienced and might never understand. The helicopter was almost overhead now, its presence commanding everyone's attention. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared for what came next, knowing that in just a few moments, her ordinary Friday afternoon was about to become extraordinary. The Black Hawk helicopter swept over the tree line like a giant mechanical bird, its dark silhouette blocking out the afternoon sun for several seconds. The rotor wash hit the football field with hurricane force, sending dirt, leaves, and debris swirling in all directions. Students screamed and ran for cover, some diving behind the bleachers while others pressed themselves against the school building. Sarah stood her ground in the center of the chaos, her feet planted firmly on the 50-yard line. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair around her face and pressed her uniform against her body, but she didn't move. She had been trained for this moment, knew exactly what to expect, and understood her role in what was about to unfold. Amanda Price and her group of followers had scattered like leaves in the wind, their phones forgotten as they sought shelter behind anything solid they could find. The confident mockery from minutes earlier had been replaced by genuine fear and confusion. None of them had ever experienced anything like the raw power and presence of a military aircraft landing at their suburban high school. The pilot brought the Black Hawk down with precision that spoke of years of experience and countless hours of training. The helicopter settled onto the football field with surprising gentleness despite the chaos of its approach. The rotors continued spinning at flight speed, creating a defensive perimeter of noise and wind that kept everyone at a distance except for the one person who belonged there. As the dust settled slightly, Sarah could see faces pressed against classroom windows throughout the school. Teachers had herded students away from the outer walls, but everyone was trying to get a glimpse of what was happening on their normally quiet campus. The principal, Dr. Martinez, was running across the parking lot with several security guards, their faces a mixture of panic and confusion. The crew chief appeared in the helicopter's side door, his flight helmet and protective gear making him look like something from a science fiction movie to the assembled students. He scanned the area professionally, his eyes settling on Sarah with a slight nod of recognition. This was standard operating procedure. Identify the passenger, assess the landing zone for threats, maintain security until departure. Sarah walked toward the aircraft with calm, measured steps that cut through the noise and chaos around her. Every eye on the field watched her approach the helicopter, finally, understanding that this wasn't some random military exercise or emergency landing. This aircraft had come specifically for the girl they had been mocking all day. The crew chief extended his hand to help Sarah aboard, a gesture of respect between service members that was completely lost on the civilian audience. Sarah accepted the assistance and climbed into the helicopter with practiced ease, her movements confident and natural. She had done this dozens of times during training, but never with an audience of her incredulous classmates. Inside the Black Hawk, Sarah was greeted by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her unit's senior non-commissioned officer. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran with combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, a woman who commanded respect wherever she went. She smiled at Sarah's composed demeanor despite the dramatic circumstances. "Martinez, good to see you," Rodriguez said through the communication headset she handed to Sarah. "Hope we didn't interrupt anything important at school today." Sarah put on the headset and grinned. "Nothing I couldn't handle, Sergeant, though I think I made some new friends." Through the helicopter's windows, Sarah could see the crowd of students and faculty who had emerged from their hiding spots now that the aircraft was on the ground. They maintained a safe distance, clearly unsure whether they were witnessing some kind of emergency or if this was somehow planned. Their faces showed a mixture of awe, confusion, and new respect for the classmate they had dismissed so easily. Dr. Martinez was arguing with someone on his phone, probably trying to figure out if this was authorized and who he needed to contact about a military helicopter landing on school property. The football coach stood with his team, all of them staring at the aircraft that dwarfed their entire field. The homecoming court had abandoned their practice, more interested in this real-life drama than their rehearsed performances. "We got about 15 minutes on the ground," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez informed Sarah. "Colonel wants to see the whole unit for a briefing, and we're your ride to the armory. You ready for this?" Sarah nodded, understanding that this was more than just transportation to a guard meeting. This was a demonstration, a teaching moment, and a reminder to everyone watching that some commitments were bigger than high school social dynamics. The timing hadn't been accidental. Her command structure knew exactly what kind of impact this would have. The helicopter's presence was already having the intended effect. Students who had ignored or mocked military service were getting their first real glimpse of what that service actually meant. The Black Hawk represented millions of dollars in technology, years of training, and the ability to project power anywhere in the world within hours. It was a tangible symbol of the commitment Sarah had made and the responsibility she had accepted. Tyler Brooks, the football captain who had mocked Sarah at lunch, was standing with his mouth open near the 20-yard line. His girlfriend, Melissa Chun, was taking pictures with her phone, but even she seemed subdued by the magnitude of what was happening. These were teenagers who thought they understood power because they were popular in high school. Now they were seeing what real authority looked like. Through the headset, Sarah could hear radio communications from the pilot and crew chief as they coordinated with local air traffic control and maintained contact with their base. The professional, clipped language of military communication was a stark contrast to the excited chatter and shouting from the crowd outside. Here was order and discipline in an environment of chaos and confusion. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, "before we take off, the colonel wanted me to explain something to you. This isn't just about getting you to the briefing. We've been watching your progress, your leadership potential, your grades in advanced training. This is also about showing your community what their local guard unit represents." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with responsibility. She understood now that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about changing perceptions, about showing civilian communities that their National Guard units were serious, professional, and ready for any mission. Her classmates' reactions were just a small part of a much larger purpose. The crew chief was monitoring the perimeter, his trained eyes constantly scanning for any potential threats or problems. This was second nature to him, the automatic vigilance that came with military service. He noticed things that civilians never saw: escape routes, defensive positions, potential hazards. Even in this safe suburban setting, he maintained the awareness that kept soldiers alive in dangerous situations. 2 minutes to departure. The pilot announced through the intercom. All passengers secure for takeoff. Sarah looked out at the assembled crowd one more time. She could see her English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, standing with other faculty members near the main building. The woman who had smiled at the morning's jokes about Sarah's uniform now wore an expression of newfound respect. Next to her, the principal was still on his phone, probably trying to explain to the school district why there was a military helicopter on school property. The students were pointing and talking excitedly, many of them filming with their phones. Sarah realized that videos of this moment would probably be all over social media within hours. The girl they had mocked for wearing camouflage would become the girl who left school in a Black Hawk helicopter. The narrative had completely changed, and with it, their understanding of who she really was. Amanda Price stood near the bleachers, her earlier confidence completely deflated. She was talking to her friends, probably trying to process what had just happened and how completely wrong her assumptions had been. Sarah felt no satisfaction in Amanda's obvious discomfort. This wasn't about getting revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about something much bigger than high school drama. The helicopter's engines began to spool up for takeoff, the rotor noise increasing dramatically. Sarah watched through the window as students and faculty backed away again, giving the aircraft room to depart. The same wind that had scattered them on landing would soon carry her away from this place. But the impact of this moment would linger long after she was gone. "Here we go," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said with a smile. "Time to show them what a real soldier looks like." The Black Hawk lifted off the football field with the same precision it had shown in landing. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of helicopter flight, the vibration through the aircraft, the smooth transition from ground to air, the changing perspective as the world fell away below them. She had experienced this dozens of times, but never with the knowledge that hundreds of people were watching from below. As they climbed, Sarah could see the entire school campus laid out beneath them. Students were scattered across the parking lot and football field, many still staring up at the departing helicopter. Cars were backed up on the street as drivers stopped to see what was happening. The normal, predictable routine of a Friday afternoon had been completely disrupted by 3 minutes of military precision. The pilot banked the helicopter toward the west, giving Sarah a panoramic view of her hometown from 500 feet. She could see the neighborhoods where her classmates lived, the shopping centers where they worked part-time jobs, the parks where they had played as children. It all looked different from this altitude, smaller, more fragile, more in need of protection. "First time seeing home from up here?" Rodriguez asked, noticing Sarah's intense focus on the view below. "Yes, Sergeant. It's different than I expected. It always is. Changes your perspective on what you're protecting, doesn't it?" Sarah nodded, understanding what Rodriguez meant. From up here, the teenage dramas and social hierarchies that seemed so important at ground level looked trivial and temporary. The real world was bigger, more complex, and full of genuine challenges that required serious people to address them. The radio crackled with communications from their destination. The National Guard Armory, where Sarah's unit was gathering for what she now realized was no ordinary briefing. Something was happening, something important enough to justify using a Black Hawk helicopter to collect a teenage Guard member from her high school. The excitement of the dramatic pickup was being replaced by curiosity about what came next. "Rodriguez," Sarah said through the headset, "what's this briefing really about? This seems like more than a routine meeting." The staff sergeant's expression grew more serious. "Can't say much until we're briefed in, but let's just say your weekend plans might be changing. The unit's being activated for a real-world mission. Nothing dangerous," she added quickly, seeing Sarah's expression, "but it's the real thing. Time to put your training to work." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was what she had trained for, what all the mock exercises and classroom instruction had been preparing her for. A real mission, with real consequences, where her performance would matter to people she didn't even know. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar uniform. Below them, the school was already returning to normal. The crowd was dispersing, students heading home or to after-school activities, faculty going back to their classrooms. By Monday morning, the helicopter landing would be the biggest story anyone had to tell, but life would go on. Sarah, however, was heading towards something that would change her understanding of service forever. The armory appeared ahead of them, a modest collection of buildings that looked unremarkable from the air. But Sarah knew that inside those buildings were weapons, equipment, and personnel ready to respond to any crisis that might arise. Her unit trained here every month, learning skills that most of their civilian neighbors hoped they would never need to use. As they approached for landing, Sarah could see other aircraft on the ground, trucks, Humvees, and support vehicles that suggested this was indeed a major activation. Other Guard members were moving with purpose between buildings, carrying equipment, and preparing for whatever mission awaited them. The casual, weekend atmosphere of normal drill was replaced by the focused urgency of real operations. "Welcome to the real military," Martinez Rodriguez said as they prepared to land. "Hope you're ready for this." Sarah checked her uniform one more time, straightened her posture, and prepared to step into a role she had trained for but never actually performed. The girl who had endured mockery and jokes about playing soldier was about to become an actual soldier with a real mission. The transformation was complete, and there was no going back. The Black Hawk touched down on the armory landing pad with military precision. As Sarah prepared to disembark, she thought about her classmates back at school, probably still trying to process what they had witnessed. They had seen their quiet, serious classmate revealed as something far more significant than they had ever imagined. But more importantly, they had seen what commitment looked like when it was real, when it meant something beyond social status or temporary achievement. Sarah's uniform wasn't a costume or a statement. It was a symbol of service, sacrifice, and responsibility that most of them couldn't even imagine. As she stepped out of the helicopter and walked toward the armory buildings, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that she had crossed a line that afternoon. She was no longer a high school student who happened to be in the National Guard. She was a soldier who happened to still be finishing high school. The distinction mattered more than her classmates would ever know. Inside the armory's main briefing room, Sarah found herself surrounded by the 43 other members of her National Guard unit. The atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced during her monthly training weekends. There was an electricity in the air, a sense of purpose and urgency that made everyone sit straighter and pay closer attention. Colonel James Morrison stood at the front of the room, his bearing and presence commanding immediate respect from every soldier present. Morrison was a career officer with 32 years of service, including multiple combat tours and disaster relief operations. When he spoke, people listened because his words carried the weight of real experience and genuine authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the room without need for amplification, "we have been activated for emergency response duty. At 1,400 hours today, a massive chemical plant explosion occurred in Millerville, approximately 60 miles northeast of our position. The blast has compromised several storage tanks containing industrial chemicals, creating a hazmat situation that threatens the surrounding communities." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This was real, not a training exercise or a theoretical scenario, but an actual emergency where people's lives were at stake. She looked around the room and saw the same realization dawning on her fellow soldiers. The weekend plans they had been making an hour ago suddenly seemed trivial and unimportant. "Local first responders are overwhelmed," the colonel continued, clicking a remote to display satellite images of the disaster area on the wall-mounted screens. The explosion was heard 15 miles away, and the resulting fires are threatening to spread to additional chemical storage areas. Civilian authorities have requested our assistance with evacuation operations, security, and logistics support. The images showed a scene that looked like something from a war zone. Massive plumes of black smoke rose from industrial buildings that had been reduced to twisted metal and debris. Emergency vehicles dotted the landscape like toys, dwarfed by the scale of destruction. Sarah could see residential neighborhoods uncomfortably close to the disaster zone, their residents probably terrified and confused about what was happening. "Our mission," Colonel Morrison said, "will be to establish a temporary evacuation center at the Millerville High School gymnasium, coordinate with civilian authorities to ensure orderly evacuation of threatened neighborhoods, and provide security for the evacuation zone. We deploy in 2 hours." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaned over to Sarah and whispered, "This is why we train, Martinez. Everything you've learned, every exercise we've run, has been preparing you for something exactly like this." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She thought about her classmates back at school, probably gossiping about the helicopter landing and wondering what it all meant. They were worried about homecoming dresses and football scores while she was preparing to help families who had lost everything in a matter of minutes. The briefing continued with detailed assignments for each team. Sarah's group would be responsible for intake and processing at the evacuation center, registering displaced families, helping them contact relatives, and ensuring they had access to basic necessities. It sounded simple, but she knew from training that managing large groups of stressed, frightened civilians required patience, organization, and genuine compassion. "Martinez," called out Captain Williams, Sarah's company commander, "you'll be working directly with the Red Cross coordinator to set up family reunification systems. Your administrative skills and your ability to stay calm under pressure make you ideal for this assignment." Sarah felt a surge of pride at being specifically chosen for such an important role. Family reunification was often the most emotionally charged aspect of disaster response. Parents separated from children, elderly relatives missing in the chaos, families who had fled their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. All of them would be depending on her to help them find each other and begin putting their lives back together. The equipment room buzzed with activity as soldiers gathered their gear for deployment. Sarah collected her field pack, communication equipment, and supplies, each item checked against a detailed list. This wasn't the surplus equipment they sometimes use for training. This was the real thing, designed for actual operations where failure wasn't just a poor grade, but could mean lives lost. As she packed her gear, Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages from classmates who had witnessed the helicopter pickup. Most were variations of, "OMG, what was that about?" and "Are you okay?" A few were more specific, asking if she was in some kind of trouble or if the helicopter landing had been planned. She typed a quick response to her best friend Monica. "Emergency call up for disaster response. Can't say much more. Will call when I can." It felt strange to be communicating about real military operations to someone who was probably more concerned with weekend plans and social media posts. The Armory's loading dock became a hub of controlled chaos as vehicles were prepared and loaded with supplies. Sarah watched experienced soldiers work with efficiency that came from years of training and real-world experience. Sergeant First Class Thompson, who had served in Iraq, loaded medical supplies with the kind of careful attention that came from knowing these materials might be the difference between life and death for someone. "First time deploying for real?" asked Specialist Davis, a college student who had joined the Guard 2 years before Sarah. Davis had responded to flooding the previous year and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen civilians in genuine distress. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I mean, I've done all the training, but this feels different." "It is different," Davis confirmed. "The people we're going to help aren't role players. Their fear is real, their loss is real, and their need for help is real. But that's also what makes it worthwhile. Everything we've learned gets to actually matter." The convoy assembled in the Armory parking lot as the sun began to set. 5 military vehicles loaded with personnel and equipment, ready to respond to a disaster that was still unfolding 60 miles away. Sarah found herself in the second vehicle, her stomach tight with anticipation and her mind running through everything she had learned about emergency response procedures. As they pulled out of the Armory, Sarah looked back at the buildings where she had spent so many weekends learning skills she hoped she would never need to use. Now those skills were about to be tested in the most serious way possible. The quiet, studious girl from Riverside High School was heading into her first real mission as a National Guard soldier. The drive to Millerville took them through small towns and rural areas that looked peaceful and normal in the fading daylight. It was hard to believe that just 60 miles away, families were fleeing their homes while industrial fires burned out of control. The contrast between the everyday world and the crisis they were driving toward made the mission feel surreal. During the drive, Captain Williams briefed the team over the radio about what they could expect when they arrived. The chemical plant explosion had occurred during a shift change, which meant more workers had been present than usual. Local hospitals were overwhelmed with injured workers and civilians affected by chemical exposure. The evacuation zone included 3 residential neighborhoods and an elementary school that had been serving as an informal gathering point for displaced families. The key thing to remember, Captain Williams emphasized, is that we're there to support the civilian authorities, not to take over. We follow their lead, we help where we're asked to help, and we maintain our professionalism at all times. These people are having the worst day of their lives, and we need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that this mission would require not just military skills, but human compassion and emotional intelligence. The families they would be helping had lost more than just their homes. They had lost their sense of security, their normal routines, and their confidence that tomorrow would be like today. Helping them required more than just organizational skills. As they approached Millerville, the evidence of the disaster became increasingly obvious. The sky ahead of them glowed with an ominous orange light from the continuing fires. Emergency vehicles passed them heading in both directions, their lights and sirens creating a constant backdrop of urgency. The air itself began to smell of smoke and industrial chemicals, even with the vehicle windows closed. "Jesus," whispered Specialist Davis as they crested a hill and got their first clear view of the disaster zone. "I had no idea it was this bad." The chemical plant looked like it had been bombed. What had once been a complex of industrial buildings was now a twisted landscape of debris and flames. Emergency vehicles surrounded the area like antibodies responding to an infection, their lights creating a chaotic light show against the darkening sky. Sarah could see helicopter silhouettes against the smoke, probably medical evacuation flights, taking the most seriously injured to hospitals in larger cities. "Welcome to the real world, people," said Sergeant Rodriguez from the front seat. "This is what we train for. This is why we matter." The convoy turned toward Millerville High School, which had been designated as the primary evacuation center. Even from a distance, Sarah could see crowds of people gathered in the parking lot, their cars loaded with whatever possessions they had been able to grab before fleeing their homes. Families stood in small groups, children crying, adults talking on cell phones or staring blankly at the distant fires that had displaced them. As they pulled into the school parking lot, Sarah felt the full weight of what she was about to undertake. These weren't training mannequins or role-playing exercises. These were real families facing a real crisis. Children who had been eating dinner an hour ago were now homeless. Parents who had been planning weekend activities were now wondering if their houses would still be standing tomorrow morning. The guard convoy parked in a designated area away from the civilian vehicles. As Sarah stepped out of the truck, she was immediately struck by the sounds and smells of the disaster. The distant rumble of helicopters, the constant chatter of radio communications, the acrid smell of chemical smoke carried on the evening breeze. This was nothing like the controlled environment of training exercises. "Martinez," called Captain Williams. "You're with me. We need to link up with the Red Cross coordinator and get the Family Reunification Center operational. People have been arriving here for 3 hours, and we need to start getting them organized." Sarah grabbed her gear and followed the captain toward the school building. As they walked through the parking lot, she saw scenes that would stay with her forever. An elderly man sitting on the hood of his car, staring at the distant fires with tears streaming down his face. A mother holding 2 small children while talking frantically on her phone, probably trying to reach relatives who could help them. A teenage boy about Sarah's age, sitting alone on a curb, his school backpack beside him, looking lost and overwhelmed. "Remember," Captain Williams said quietly as they approached the school entrance, "these people need us to be strong, calm, and competent. They need to believe that someone is in control, that help is here, and that things are going to get better. Whether or not that's true right now, they need to believe it." Sarah nodded, understanding that her role extended far beyond just processing paperwork and organizing supplies. She was representing hope, stability, and the promise that their government and community would take care of them in their time of need. The uniform she wore wasn't just military clothing. It was a symbol of competence and reliability to people who desperately needed both. Inside the school, the gymnasium had been converted into a temporary shelter that looked like something from a disaster movie. Cots and blankets were arranged in rough rows, with families clustering around their assigned spaces. Volunteers from various organizations moved among the evacuees, distributing food, water, and basic supplies. The noise level was overwhelming. Dozens of conversations in multiple languages, children crying, cell phones ringing, and the constant announcements over a public address system. Sarah found herself assigned to a table near the gymnasium entrance where displaced families were required to register upon arrival. Her job was to collect basic information about each family, names, addresses, number of people, any special needs, and, most importantly, any missing family members who needed to be located. It was detailed work that required patience and sensitivity, especially when dealing with people who were traumatized and confused. The first family she processed was the Johnsons, a middle-aged couple with 3 children ranging in age from 6 to 15. Mrs. Johnson was clearly in shock, answering Sarah's questions in a monotone voice while staring past her at nothing. Mr. Johnson kept checking his phone, probably hoping for updates about their house or word from neighbors who had also been evacuated. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Sarah asked, following the standard protocol for newly arrived families. "We don't know," Mrs. Johnson replied. "We just grabbed the kids and left. I don't even know if our house is still there." The explosion was so loud, and then everyone was telling us to leave right away. Sarah felt a surge of empathy for the family situation. 6 hours ago, they had been living their normal lives in their own home. Now, they were refugees in their own community, dependent on strangers for their most basic needs. She made careful notes about their situation and directed them to the family services area where Red Cross volunteers could help them contact relatives and arrange temporary housing. As the evening progressed, Sarah processed dozens of families, each with their own story of loss and displacement. Some had evacuated so quickly that they had left pets behind, not knowing if they would be able to return to rescue them. Others had elderly relatives in assisted living facilities within the evacuation zone and were desperate for information about their safety. One case particularly affected Sarah, a single mother named Maria Gonzalez with 2 young daughters who spoke little English. Mrs. Gonzalez was clearly terrified and couldn't understand much of what was happening around her. Sarah's high school Spanish, supplemented by gestures and patience, allowed her to provide basic information and connect the family with a bilingual volunteer who could better assist them. "Gracias, señorita," Mrs. Gonzalez said with tears in her eyes as Sarah helped fill out her registration forms. "Los niños tienen miedo." The children are scared. Sarah looked at the 2 little girls, probably 5 and 7 years old, holding tightly to their mother's hands while watching the chaos around them with wide, frightened eyes. This was their first experience with real danger, their first understanding that the world could change completely without warning. Sarah made sure they were connected with child services volunteers who could provide activities and distractions while their mother dealt with the adult concerns of finding shelter and contacting relatives. By midnight, Sarah had processed more than 60 families, each representing a small human tragedy playing out against the backdrop of industrial disaster. Her back ached from hunching over paperwork. Her voice was hoarse from talking to traumatized people all evening, and her emotions were drained from witnessing so much human suffering up close. But she had also seen something remarkable: the way communities responded when crisis struck. Volunteers had arrived from churches, civic organizations, and service clubs throughout the region. Local restaurants had donated food, hotels had offered discounted rates for evacuees, and neighboring school districts had volunteered to accommodate displaced students until the crisis was resolved. Martinez called Staff Sergeant Rodriguez as Sarah finished processing her last family of the evening. "You did good work tonight. Real good work. These people needed someone who could stay calm, be patient, and treat them with dignity during the worst day of their lives. You gave them that." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction that was different from any achievement in high school. Academic grades and social recognition felt trivial compared to the knowledge that her work had directly helped families in genuine crisis. This was what service actually meant, not the theoretical concepts from training manuals, but the practical reality of being useful when people desperately needed help. As she prepared to catch a few hours of sleep before the next day's operations, Sarah thought about her classmates back home. They were probably getting ready for bed after an evening of typical teenage activities: homework, texting, watching movies. Meanwhile, she had spent her night learning what responsibility really looked like when it mattered most. The contrast wasn't lost on her. While her peers worried about homecoming plans and social media posts, she had been helping families who had lost their homes, their security, and their sense of normalcy. The gulf between teenage concerns and adult responsibilities had never seemed wider, but Sarah knew which side of that divide she belonged on. 3 weeks later, Sarah walked through the halls of Riverside High School with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The same students who had mocked her uniform were now watching her with something approaching awe. The story of the helicopter pickup had become legendary, but more importantly, news of her role in the Millerville disaster response had spread throughout the school and community. The local newspaper had run a front-page story about the National Guard's response to the chemical plant explosion, featuring a photo of Sarah helping an elderly evacuee fill out paperwork. The headline read, "Local Teen Serves Community in Crisis," and the article detailed how high school students in the Guard had worked alongside experienced soldiers to help hundreds of displaced families. Monica Rivera, Sarah's best friend since middle school, caught up with her at her locker between classes. "Girl, you're like famous now," Monica said, showing Sarah her phone screen. "This has been shared like 1,000 times on Instagram. Look at all these comments." Sarah glanced at the screen, seeing dozens of positive responses to the newspaper article. Former classmates who had never spoken to her were praising her service. Parents were commenting about how proud the community should be of young people like Sarah. Even some of her teachers had shared the article with comments about being inspired by their students' dedication. "It's weird," Sarah admitted. 3 weeks ago, people thought my uniform was a joke. Now suddenly, everyone wants to know about the National Guard. That's because they finally understand what it really means," Monica replied. "Before, they just saw you as different. Now they see you as someone who actually matters." The change in how people treated her was dramatic and sometimes uncomfortable. Teachers who had barely acknowledged her before were now asking about her experiences and suggesting she speak to younger students about service opportunities. The principal had asked her to consider joining the student council, arguing that her leadership experience would benefit the school. In American government class, Mr. Thompson had restructured his entire unit on civic duty around Sarah's real-world experience. "Miss Martinez," he said as she took her seat, "would you mind sharing with the class what you learned about emergency management during your deployment?" Sarah felt dozens of eyes on her as she considered how to answer. How could she explain the complexity of managing hundreds of scared, displaced families to classmates who had never faced anything more challenging than a pop quiz? How could she describe the weight of being responsible for people's safety and welfare to teenagers who worried about their social media followers? "It's different when it's real," she said finally. "Everything you think you know about helping people changes when you're actually face-to-face with someone who has lost everything. The training helps, but mostly you just have to care enough to do whatever needs to be done." Tyler Brooks, the football captain who had mocked her uniform, raised his hand. "Sarah, what was it like when that helicopter came to get you? I mean, we all saw it, but what was it like being inside when it was happening? Sarah looked at Tyler, remembering his cruel jokes about her never having seen a real gun. Now, he was asking genuine questions, treating her like someone whose experiences mattered. The transformation in his attitude reflected the broader change in how the entire school perceived her. Honestly, I was focused on the mission, Sarah replied. The helicopter was just transportation to where I was needed. The impressive part wasn't the aircraft, it was seeing professional soldiers respond to a real crisis with the kind of teamwork and competence that saves lives. Amanda Price, who had led the mockery on the day of the helicopter pickup, approached Sarah after class. Amanda looked genuinely embarrassed as she waited for other students to leave the room. Sarah, I owe you an apology, Amanda said quietly. I was completely wrong about you, and I said some really cruel things. I had no idea what you were actually doing or what it meant. Sarah studied Amanda's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than the performative apology she might have expected. The disaster response had taught her something about forgiveness and, moving forward, about focusing on what mattered rather than settling old scores. Thank you for saying that, Sarah replied. I appreciate it, and I accept your apology. We all make assumptions sometimes. Can I ask you something? Amanda continued. How do you balance all of this with school? I mean, you're carrying a 4.0 GPA while doing actual military service. How do you manage everything? It was a fair question, and one that Sarah had been grappling with herself. The past 3 weeks had included regular debriefing sessions with her guard unit, additional training to prepare for future deployments, and catch-up work for the classes she had missed during the emergency response. She was essentially living two completely different lives. Time management and priorities, Sarah answered honestly. When you've helped families who lost their homes in an industrial accident, studying for a chemistry test doesn't seem as overwhelming. It's all about perspective. At lunch, Sarah found herself surrounded by students who wanted to know more about military service. Some were genuinely curious about the National Guard and the opportunities it offered. Others seemed more interested in the social status that her newfound reputation provided. Sarah tried to answer everyone's questions honestly while steering the conversation toward the serious aspects of service. Do you think you'll stay in the military after high school? Asked Jennifer Walsh, a junior who was considering her own post-graduation options. I'm committed to 8 years total, Sarah explained. 4 active guard duty for inactive reserve. After that, I'll see where life takes me. The Guard is paying for my college, so I'll have a degree and military experience when I'm 22. That opens a lot of doors. What about deployment? Asked Mark Stevens, who had dismissed the Guard as weekend camping just a few weeks earlier. Do you think you'll get sent overseas? Sarah considered the question carefully. The possibility of deployment was always present for Guard members, and recent global tensions had increased the likelihood of activation for overseas missions. The idea didn't frighten her the way it might have before Millerville. She had seen what she was capable of under pressure. It's possible, she said. If that happens, I'm prepared for it. That's what I signed up for, and I understand the responsibility that comes with the commitment. The conversation was interrupted by Coach Williams, who approached their table with uncharacteristic hesitation. Sarah remembered his sarcastic comment about her uniform on the day of the helicopter pickup, when he had suggested she join the football team. Martinez, he said awkwardly, I wanted to apologize for what I said a few weeks ago. I had no idea you were doing something so important. I was out of line. Sarah looked up at the coach, a man who commanded respect throughout the school, but was now clearly uncomfortable with his own behavior. She appreciated that he had made the effort to apologize publicly in front of students who had witnessed his original comments. Thank you, Coach. I appreciate that. I was wondering, he continued, if you might consider talking to the team sometime about leadership and teamwork. What you did during that disaster response. That's the kind of real leadership these boys need to understand. Sarah agreed to speak to the football team, understanding that her role was evolving from just being a student to being an example of service and commitment. It was a responsibility she took seriously, knowing that her words and actions might influence other young people's decisions about their own futures. After school, Sarah drove to the armory for her regular monthly training weekend. The familiar routine of military preparation felt different now that she had experienced real operations. The equipment checks, tactical exercises, and leadership scenarios all carried new weight because she had seen how they applied to actual missions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez greeted her with a smile. "Martinez, how's our local celebrity doing? I heard you've been getting some attention at school." "It's been interesting, Sergeant. A lot of questions about what we actually do." "Good. People need to understand that their guard unit isn't just playing soldier on weekends. We're part of the community, and we're here when things go wrong." During the training session, Sarah found herself paired with new recruits who had joined partly because of the publicity surrounding the Millerville response. Two were recent high school graduates who had been inspired by media coverage of young Guard members making a real difference in their community. "Martinez," said one of the new recruits, Private Johnson, "is it true you were still in high school when you deployed to that chemical plant disaster?" "I still am in high school," Sarah replied with a smile. "Senior year. Graduation is in 6 months." Private Johnson looked amazed. "How do you handle all of this while still being in school?" "I'm struggling just with basic training, and I've already graduated." Sarah thought about her answer, remembering her own early struggles to balance civilian and military responsibilities. It's about understanding that both parts of your life matter, but for different reasons. School is preparing you for your civilian career. This is preparing you to serve your community when they really need help. Both require your best effort. As the training weekend progressed, Sarah noticed how much her role within the unit had evolved. Senior NCOs were asking for her input on training scenarios, using her recent experience to make exercises more realistic. Her perspective, as someone who had actually worked with civilian disaster victims, was valuable for preparing other soldiers who might face similar missions. Colonel Morrison approached her during a break in training. "Martinez, I've been following your progress since Millerville, and I'm impressed with how you've handled the attention and responsibility. Have you given any thought to pursuing a commission? We could use officers with your combination of practical experience and leadership potential." The suggestion of becoming an officer was both flattering and intimidating. Sarah had been focused on completing her current enlistment and using her educational benefits to attend college. The possibility of military service as a career path hadn't seriously occurred to her before. "Sir, I hadn't really thought about it. I'm still figuring out college and what I want to study." "Think about it," Colonel Morrison suggested. "The Army needs officers who understand what service really means, who've proven themselves under real-world conditions. You've got time to decide, but the opportunity will be there if you want it." Driving home from the armory, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 3 weeks. The quiet, serious student who had been mocked for wearing camouflage was now being asked to speak to school groups, considering a military career, and serving as an example of youth service to her community. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "Movie tonight? Everyone wants to hang out with you now. It's like you're famous or something." Sarah smiled at the message, but declined the invitation. She had homework to complete, and she needed time to process everything that had happened. The social recognition was nice, but it wasn't why she served. She had learned the difference between approval and respect, between being popular and being valued for genuine contributions. At home, Sarah found her parents waiting with obvious pride and some concern. The newspaper article and community attention had made them local celebrities by association, but they also worried about their daughter's rapid transition from teenager to public figure. "Mija," her mother said, "are you sure you're ready for all of this attention? You're still just 18 years old." "I'm ready, Mama. This is what I chose, and I understand what it means." Her father, who had worked multiple jobs to support the family, looked at his daughter with amazement. "I'm proud of you, Sarah, but I want you to remember that you still have choices. This military life, it's a big commitment. Don't let other people's expectations decide your future." Sarah appreciated her parents' concern, but she also knew they didn't fully understand what she had discovered about herself. The girl who had joined the Guard primarily for college benefits had found something much more valuable, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal advancement. That evening, as she worked on college application essays, Sarah found herself writing about service, leadership, and the responsibility that came with being someone others could depend on in crisis situations. The essays felt honest in a way that typical high school experiences couldn't provide. She had genuinely lived through events that tested her character and proved her capabilities. Her phone buzzed with another text, this time from Amanda Price. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said about service. Do you think the Guard would be interested in someone like me? I know I was awful to you, but I think I want to do something that actually matters." Sarah stared at the message for several minutes before responding. Amanda's interest seemed genuine, but Sarah also knew that military service wasn't something to pursue casually or for social reasons. It required genuine commitment and a willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for broader responsibilities. She typed back, "Military service is a serious decision. If you're really interested, I can connect you with a recruiter who can explain what's actually involved. But make sure you understand what you're committing to before you decide." As she prepared for bed, Sarah looked at her uniform hanging in the closet. Tomorrow was a normal school day, and she would return to being a regular student. But she knew that the uniform represented something permanent now, not just a weekend activity or a path to college funding, but a core part of who she had become. The girl who had been mocked for showing up in camouflage had proven that some things were worth more than social approval. She had learned that real respect came from genuine service, that leadership meant taking responsibility for others' welfare, and that some commitments were serious enough to define a person's entire character. Sarah Martinez fell asleep that night, knowing that in 6 months she would graduate from high school. But she also knew that her real education in service, sacrifice, and what it meant to be someone others could count on had already begun. The helicopter landing had been just the beginning of a journey that would continue long after her classmates had forgotten about homecoming courts and football games. The camouflage uniform hanging in her closet wasn't a costume or a statement. It was a symbol of the person she had chosen to become. And that choice, made with full understanding of what it required, would guide her decisions for years to come. Sarah had learned that some things were worth more than approval, more lasting than popularity, and more important than the easy path through life. Her classmates had finally learned to respect her, but more importantly, Sarah had learned to respect herself for the right reasons. The transformation was complete, permanent, and had prepared her for a future defined by service rather than self-interest. The girl who had endured mockery had become a woman capable of leading others through their worst moments, and that was worth more than any high school popularity contest could ever offer.